Over my career, I've done a lot of interviews with some well-known people and some people no one's heard about before. I thought it might be fun to drag some of them out of the archives and share them here on YouTube. You can't listen to a cartoon from the Golden Age, or, for example, Rocky and Bullwinkle, or listen to an old-time radio drama without hearing June Foray, the queen of the comic voices, who in her mid-90s won her first award for her work in television. I sat down with June Foray, and what a thrill that was. She told me that much of her personality came from her very intelligent parents.
They were very eclectic people. They would take us to the opera, they'd take us to the theater, they'd take us to the movies. I would impersonate everybody I saw or heard. And when I was 6 years old, I told my mother and dad that I wanted to be an actor. You know, they had that look on their face. Oh, come on, she's only 6 years old.
She's barely in grade school.
I was always an omnivorous reader, as my parents were. And I used to memorize plays, George Bernard Shaw, other playwrights, and take all the parts.
Were your parents well educated?
Yes, they were extremely intelligent. My dad was an engineer, and my mother was a singer and a pianist. And I remember my dad sitting in his huge chair, reading all the time. I still have all my Shakespeare and George Bernard Shaw original books that I used to read from.
So your favorites were plays. Your tastes are older. You're 6 years old, but you're reading George Bernard Shaw.
Oh, yeah. We used to go to the library every week, my brother and sister and I, and get 5 or 6 books and read them. I still have an original Edgar Allan Poe.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah.
That's precious.
Yeah.
I should explain to those listening that there's something funny in your phone system. Some machine or somebody keeps calling you in the background. So if you hear June's phone ring, it's either somebody or it's a fan. We don't know which it is. Did you get into plays in grade school? You were impersonating people.
Yes. My mother and dad got me, at that time they called them elocution lessons. A teacher, Mrs. Larson, and she was from the stage, and she put me on her radio show when I was 12. After that, she said, June, I can't teach you anymore. You're better than I am. It sounds egotistical, and I don't mean to sound that way, but that's what she said. And so when I was 15, I had the audacity to call the station manager and say, look, I can do all the parts that this company of yours is doing every week. I'd like to do it. And they said, okay. And that's how I started.
So you saved the money by being everybody in the cast, or a lot of the cast members. They used to call that doubling and tripling. Yeah.
I doubled all the time. Still do.
Well, you know, you couldn't really do that on television, but I am rather an expert on old-time radio. I'll hear somebody such as Larry Dobkin or John Daner being one person, and then 20 minutes later, I know that that's them again. But that was the fun of it, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Being able to do that.
I always doubled, always. I first met my husband. He was the head writer at NBC in Chicago. And then they moved out here to California. And he called somebody and said, I need somebody who can do a good Spanish dialect. Do you know anybody could do it? Oh, the only one to call is June Foray. So that's how we met. He was married to somebody else. I was married to somebody else, both unhappily. It was love at first sight.
Wow.
And so I did the Buster Brown show.
Buster Brown's shoes?
Yes.
Yes. He was a character, but they also had a shoe company named Buster Brown.
Yes, it was the Buster Brown Shoe Company.
Yeah.
Yes. Apparently, Steve Allen had just moved up from Arizona. He got a job at KHJ, which is a mutual broadcasting company. And it was called Smile Time. and they needed somebody who could do multiple voices. And they said, well, get June Foray. She's the only one. I started doing a show with Steve Allen and Wendell Nobin. They had just moved up from Arizona. Steve played the piano, Wendell Noble sang, and I was Junie the girlfriend.
Junie the girlfriend.
And I did crazy voices, one after another. So then, apparently, Capitol Records heard about me or heard the show, and so they put me under contract with Dawes Butler, Stan Freberg, Mel Blanc, and I, doing all the voices for the children's shows. Neither Warner's nor Disney had record companies, and so I would do Bozo the Clown. I did so many Disney characters as well as Warner's, and that's how I got started in animation, because Disney liked what I did, and they called me to do the cat in Cinderella, Lucifer.
That was the first one?
As far as I can recall.
Yeah. You know, the thing that I have found out by research and talking to people is we forget how important radio was at that time. There was television in only the big cities. Maybe 5 or 6 cities had television, but everybody had radio. And it must have been a wonderful time to work with all those people in Hollywood. And you had people such as Hans Conried who were running around. And we want to talk about William Conrad later. But what was it like to be among this wonderful, talented bunch of people?
Well, it was a joy. You know, people go to work and they hate their work. I loved it. It was like going to a party every night or every afternoon, whichever. You became friends. You loved each other. We all knew each other. And I did the Danny Thomas show every week, the Phil Harris show every week, Jimmy Durante show every week. It was fun because you knew everybody, and they knew that they could trust you in doubling whatever you could do.
Let's talk a moment about Lux Radio Theater. It ran for 20 years. During part of that time, Cecil B. DeMille was the director of the show. You had everybody who ever made a movie recreating the roles, although sometimes there would be a different actor doing the role, which was interesting. In Casablanca, they couldn't get Bogey and Bergman. It was Alan Ladd and Hedy Lamarr. And it's so funny, but that was an hour show live that had Louis Silver's orchestra, sometimes a very big cast. It must have been just ulcer time, and it had to come off on time. I mean, I listened to those Lux Radio theaters, and I know you had a lot of rehearsals, but it must have been magic.
One rehearsal.
Just one? I assumed there were more. Wow.
As far as I know.
Maybe you only needed one.
That's all, because we would be hired for our talent. We knew what we were going to do. The only time after rehearsal, if it was over like 2 minutes or something, there would be an editing job. But the thing is also, we work at 5 o'clock here to go back east at 8. Then we'd have to come back here and repeat the show again.
They always said the West Coast show was better because it had one more rehearsal.
Oh, I don't know. I don't feel that way, because when you're there the first time, you're eager and you're anxious and you've got to be good.
Well, I think the thing that killed radio drama was in the late 40s when they invented the tape recorder. Because if it's live, the adrenaline is flowing. But if you know you can make a mistake, you'll make a mistake.
That's right. I know when Smile Time went off, Steve Allen had a Saturday night show. We did about 8 or 8:30. It's a half-hour show. And I played multiple voices again, of course. But one of the actors, he showed up drunk. In the middle of the show, he just put his cane down and walk off. walk off the stage. But Steve was so great. He could improvise. He could do anything. He was fantastic.
You know, the late Harry Bartell told me that when they did Gunsmoke, they had one rehearsal, and he said, but we had to be that good. And so it took an incredible talent, such as yours, and a few other people, to make radio work.
That's right. But we were confident, and they were, the directors. They hired the correct people, and that was it.
I had mentioned to you at an earlier meeting that one of my great memories from old-time radio was when Bob Hope was doing the movie Ghostbusters, and you were playing a witch or something with that craggy voice, and the audience loved you so much, Bob Hope stopped. Can you remind us about that?
Well, I played one of these mystics, who look in a glass ball, and one of these crazy fine ladies, like that. And the audience applauded. And Bob Hope came over to my microphone. He kissed me and he said, I thought I was the only one to have funny lines.
I remember it was from one of those half-hour Academy Award theater or something where they did the old movies. But I thought that was so funny. He just ad-libbed that, but he paid tribute to you.
Yes.
Because the audience was paying more attention to you than they were Bob Hope's character.
Isn't that incredible?
Absolutely. Now, you said that you did multiple parts on some of these. You were then asked by Warner's and Disney to start doing cartoon voices, which to me is very much like radio in a way, isn't it?
You don't have to get dressed. You don't have to memorize lines. It's fun. We all love each other. It's a small group of people. We sort of grew up with each other.
Well, Janet Waldo told me that everyone, if you didn't get the part, you wanted your friend to get the part. There was no really vicious backbiting or anything.
No, none. We loved each other. We respected each other's talents. The reason I got Smile Time was everybody at CBS, when it was at Gower and Sunset, we would sit in the lobby, very nice at CBS. They would have chairs and sofas. So as soon as a director and a producer came in the door, we'd go over and grab them and say, hey, listen, I can do this. I can do that. There was one girl, she had two brothers, Jack and Sam Edwards, and Florida said, there are a couple of guys from Arizona who are looking for a lady can do a lot of voices. She said, I can only do one. Why don't you call them and see if you could audition? That was Florida, thoughtful. And so when I auditioned for Steve Allen, I got it. We remained friends until he died. And of course I knew him with his first wife and his three sons. And then they were divorced, and then he married Jane. But I love both of them, and I love Jane too, Jane Meadows. And but Steve and I remained friends all these years.
June, what was it like going to Disney for the first time? Because by the time you would have been asked, Disney had an incredible reputation. Was there some magic about going to Disney? And at the time, where did they record? In Burbank?
We recorded at the Disney studio. I got a call from my agent. I think that he had listened to the Capitol Records, and that's how Disney heard about me. And so he called me to do the cat in Cinderella. Now, I did the one-liners at the end of Speaking of Animals, live-action shorts about animals. And then
the animal speaks.
One line
they animated the mouth, right?
One line at the end, pulling a joke. I did a lot of those at the Jerry Fairbanks studio on Sunset. And somebody told me that I did Red Hot Riding Hood for Tex Avery. And I think that was in the 40s. But I thought that was an actor a radio show because we recorded it. And since then, of course, I did several for Tex when it was out at MGM.
I really envy you because I remember Paul Frees gave me a cassette of about 45 minutes of outtakes and background discussion from Rocky and Bullwinkle.
Yes.
And you guys were yelling at each other and breaking each other up. You must have, as you said, really looked forward. And, of course, Bill Scott's showing how he did Bullwinkle's voice. And he said if you wear glasses, you have to take off your glasses because you have to go, "Hi there!" Your face has. That's the other thing about animation. You have to move. Same way with the radio. You have to know the body language.
Well, when I do the witch, I crouch over like this because it helps. It explains your character, your physical abilities.
Well, Mel Blanc's son, Noel, always said that if he were on the other side of the glass and the speaker wasn't on, he could tell which character his dad was doing by the way his face looked.
You're absolutely right.
You did Witch Hazel, and one of the things I want to get into early here is the fact that, not to put words in your mouth, but I have always looked at you and the few other people who were the masters of cartoons as being actors, because it's more than just creating the voice. If you don't have the ability to put life into that voice, it doesn't mean anything.
You know, I taught at USC for 7 semesters. I would have some of the students come over and say, "June, listen to what I can do." They would go through one terrific voice after another. I got copy in front of them. They couldn't act. It's got to come from inside.
And you know, one of the funny things is I remember talking to Janet Waldo about this, is I do a couple of character voices, and a couple of years ago I actually did the Dickens Christmas Carol doing all the voices. And I'm a better actor as the voices than I am as myself. When I hear Dennis Daly act, he's okay. But the characters really, and I guess that's because I put my soul into that. I don't like the way I act. I like the way my characters act.
You see, it's different today. I was there in the classic time when Janet and Mel Blanc, Bill Conrad, Paul Frees, it was inside. You could not only do the voice, but you were natural. When I do Jokey Smurf, I read it with sincerity, not just screaming and doing the funny voice. I acted it.
Yeah, and today they tell me that if you're in a scene with 2 or 3 people, they're not there. You record your voice, they bring in Danny DeVito, he does his voice. I don't see how you can have a play going on with more than one person and not have eye contact.
You know, we're used to it. People who have been in the animation business for a long time can do it. Now they are doing line by line, except the Garfield show. Boy, that's all ensemble, which is wonderful, because you can play off of each other. But I know that some of the actors, the movie actors who come in to do voices, they say, "Gee, it's hard to do because we don't know what's going on, and, you know, we're used to it. We can do it." They can't. They found it very difficult because when I do Baby Looney Tunes last year, Granny, of course, in the Warner Brothers cartoons, they went up to Canada because it was cheaper to get the actors to do Bugs and Daffy and all the characters. But I didn't even hear them when they came back. They never played the thing for me. They would just give me the lines to do. I would read the line before and think of what it was so I could do it. But I'm used to that, as most who do voices professionally for a long time know how to do it. But the screen people, they don't. They're used to memorizing lines and being with people, you know, facing one camera or another. It's different now.
I want to talk about Rocky and Bullwinkle, but I don't want to just talk about that, because when I was on the way over here, I thought June Foray probably is sick of people just asking her about Rocky and Bullwinkle, because I interviewed Margaret Hamilton one time, and I asked her about being the Wicked Witch in The Wizard of Oz, and then she said, look, I was in 113 other movies. Let's talk about something else, but let's talk about Rocky and Bullwinkle. It was an incredible ensemble company. You recorded it with the other actors in the studio, and you had nutty Jay Ward putting all of this together. How many years did that run? Do you remember?
Yes. We did the demo in 1958. A whole year went by. As a matter of fact, I write an introduction to a new book by Daryl Van Sitter that's coming out next year, all about Jay Ward and how it all started. Jay never directed anybody, but it was like going to a party every night. We ragged each other, we told jokes, and finally Jay would say, okay, let's get going. He was the only time we ever had to repeat it is if we were 2 or 3 seconds over. That's the only time. But it was ensemble. And a wonderful thing, too, Edward Everett Horton. He was so great. He was, I guess, in the 70s or 80s at the time. I would think so. Usually, the motion picture people, they have to memorize lines before they come in. Edward Everett would pick up the script, we'd read it once, he'd do it, and then that wonderful twisted smile of his, well, I got to go play tennis.
Did you record more than one episode in a single day?
Yes. You see, our segments were only 3.5 minutes long. Rocky and Bullwinkle, and then came Fractured Fairy Tales and Dudley Do-Right. So that made up the half hour.
Yes, and now you said you had worked with Phil Harris and Alice Faye. When you talk about Mr. Peabody and those people, that brings up Walter Tetley.
Yes.
Now, Walter Tetley was a grown man who still sounded like a little boy.
Yes, he did.
But because he was an adult, he could act. And many times he would steal the show on the Phil Harris, Alice Faye show.
Yeah, he was terrific.
Playing a snotty little kid.
I know.
Yeah. One of the sessions of Rocky and Bullwinkle on the cassette, Bill Conrad talking about Rocky climbing higher and higher and higher and then plummeting to earth. And then Paul Frees, in his Ed Wynn voice, said something about like a little fuzzy comet. And I remember you just broke up. It was 4 minutes before you could get working again. It was so delightful to hear that.
Oh, I know. When we did Dudley Do-Right, I was also Little Nell, of course.
Mm-hmm. So it was Bill Scott as Dudley.
Right.
And then
I was Nell.
And Paul Frees was Inspector Fenwick.
And Hans Conried was the evil guy. But I'll never forget one of the lines, which I thought was very funny. Dudley asked Nell to marry him because she usually loves horse, But he asked Nell to marry him, and Nell would say, "Oh, Dudley, you are too good for me," and he said, "For you, Nell, I would rotten up." I'll never forget that line.
What a lovely line. I will rotten up. Now, did you watch the shows on TV?
Yeah.
Because a lot of cartoon people have told me they've never seen their work. I can't imagine that.
Also, I have not only the films of it, also the DVDs.
Ah.
But they're doing Mr. Peabody and Fred for a feature next year.
Wow.
And they have a short, a Dudley, Rocky and Bullwinkle short, auditioning other people to do Rocky and Natasha.
Nasty. Why would they do that? They probably want some young Hollywood star with name appeal. It is this new, wet behind the ear generation, June, who doesn't have any understanding of our heritage?
There was so much aggravation among my fans. They're letting me do Dudley. They're calling somebody else to do Natasha. I'm still here.
Sure
and
you
I can
are.
still do it.
Yeah.
I still sound like Natasha Downing. I would always sound like Natasha.
But the other thing about some of those amazing cartoons is we forget those were prime time shows.
Yes.
You know, they got rerun on Saturday morning, but those were prime time shows.
Well, before doing a lot of series, I did theatrical shorts with Mel Blanc at Warner Brothers. I was always Granny, and I played Witch Hazel again. That's why Walt Disney was furious with me, because he created Witch Hazel, and when I went to work for Chuck Jones, I looked at the script. I had never met Chuck before. I looked at the script, and it said Witch Hazel. Same actor, same voice. Disney never hired me again. I guess he was upset because, you see, it's some kind of a analgesic rub, I think, of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
And so they couldn't copyright it. I asked Mark Davis, I said, how come, because he was working at Disney, how come they could call it Witch Hazel? He said the nurse's name was Hazel, and so they wanted to make fun of the nurse because they loved her, so they called her Witch Hazel.
Wow. Well, you know, there was always that thing I never understood about the difference between Kenny Delmar's Senator Claghorn on the Fred Allen Show and Mel Blanc's Foghorn Leghorn. They were essentially the same voice. I don't know which came first.
I don't either.
Maybe they didn't talk about it.
I don't know. I have no idea. I did about 40 shorts, theatrical shorts, for Chuck Jones and Fritz Freeling, all the guys at Warner Brothers. And then Walter Lantz called me, and I did Knothead and Splinter, plus a lot of the other characters. I was Aunt May and Spider-Man, but it's been a wholesome, wonderful career, theatrical shorts. I've even turned down live action. The last live action acting job that I did was Green Acres. I was the Mexican girl, you know, that had switchboard because she was trying to get the boss. He was up on the tree somewhere, up on the light pole, and I couldn't get him. And so I said, I can't do this no more. And she walks out.
One of the things that always gets discussed when you talk to a voice artist such as June Foray is the fact that it's more than just being able to do a funny or interesting voice. You know, there's acting involved here. None of us would have grown to love Rocky or Natasha or Bullwinkle or any of the other characters if they were only two-dimensional. But June Foray, through her acting ability, brought life into every character she portrayed, whether it be in the cartoons or during the golden days of radio. Many of the cartoon voices that she provided were done at Warner Brothers, and I wanted to talk to her about that amazing place. Was there any crazier place than the Warner Brothers cartoon studio? I think they called it Termite Terrace.
Termite Terrace, yes.
Yeah. I heard that they had a buzzer or something in the receptionist that whenever a reporter or somebody would come in, she'd alert them down in the animation room, and instead of looking busier, they would stop and just sit there. And they got the reputation, how can these people crank out all these cartoons? No one ever saw them working. So that's the sense of humor they had. Now, I had heard that there was one part, though, and maybe it was with the Flintstones, that you didn't get. Do you want to talk about that?
I was very hurt. They called Dawes Butler and me to do the demo, and we did it. And then after that, I heard that they were auditioning people. And so my agent called Hanna-Barbera, because I had worked with them on Tom and Jerry's out at MGM. I did a lot of their Tom and Jerry's for them. And they said, oh, no, we want to hire somebody else. I don't know why. I was very hurt. And
so you created the roles in the pilot.
Yes.
And maybe on the strength of that, the concept got sold. But then they wanted somebody else. Yeah.
Right. And so I shouldn't say this because I love Bill and Joe, and I'd worked with them for so long. Joe called my agent the following year or something like that, and I was very busy with Walter Lantz and at Warner's at MGM. And he said, we'd like June to come and work with us for something. And I said, I probably shouldn't say this, but I said, you tell him to take a long walk off a short pier.
You can't be an actor without having some ego, but it's also pride in your work. And I guess in a way you assumed that when the Flintstones got sold, that you were in like Flint on that.
Well, I was hurt.
Yeah.
But I finally did get to do, I did Grandma Dynamite in one of the Flintstone episodes, you know, the old lady who bombs the banks and so forth. So I did a few things, and I think I was in A Man Called Flintstones, too.
Yeah.
But I didn't do it. But I'm glad, because if I had worked at Hanna-Barbera for everything, I wouldn't have worked for Chuck, for Tex Avery, for Walter Lantz. So I'm lucky that way.
What was Walter Lantz like?
He was a darling man.
I always thought of him as kind of my uncle. He just kind of would get on TV and talk, and there didn't seem to be a pretentious bone in his body.
He was a very avuncular man,
Mm-hmm.
and he never directed. Nobody ever directed us. He would hire the people whom he knew could do the part. And so I did Knothead and Splinter, plus a lot of the other characters. But then I used to go to the Zagreb every year.
Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Every other year. And then every other year I go to advocacy. And there's a picture of Walter down there. We were at Zagreb. And by this time, I got to know him and Gracie personally, the way I had with everybody. And he said, June, Gracie and I have, we've ordered a car to take us around the Dalmatian coast. Would you like to come with us? And I said, darling, I would love it. So we went around the entire Dalmatian coast, and it was wonderful.
Now, Walter Lantz's wife, Gracie, was the original Woody Woodpecker, wasn't she? Or do you know? I had heard that she did it at one time.
Mel Blanc did it the first time, one show.
But he was there in the beginning.
But then Walter didn't feel that he was right for the part. So then Gracie took over. Mel only did 1 or 2 episodes, and that was it. Gracie did the rest. And Gracie was telling me that her dad was blind, but they did a vaudeville show where they would travel and do comedy things on stage. And they were wonderful people. There were so many people. Walter was, he was so faithful to everybody.
Well, we've talked about it before, but it was a different time in Hollywood.
Yes.
Certainly there was money being made, but there seems to be a kind of loyalty among the performers that doesn't exist. I mean, the Hollywood stars live in Montana now. They don't even live in Hollywood.
I know. These were classic times. I am so grateful, Dennis, that I was there. Everybody else is in Upsidasium, and I'm still here. So Janet, Waldo, and I, and just a couple of people are still around. Most of them are gone.
Let me ask get into a few more areas here, and that is, you're very interested in some programs dealing with animation, I think. I have this idea, and maybe somebody's done it, that if you want to do a cartoon, you need a story, you need the voices, the sound effects, and the music. I would like to, if I had the money, I would give a grant to some college animator and get him an episode from the 50s that was recorded on tape that sounds live of maybe Gunsmoke or Frontier Gentleman, Have Gun Will Travel, probably Gunsmoke, and say, tell me what you see when you hear this. I would love to see a classic episode of Gunsmoke with William Conrad, Parley Bear, Howard McNear, and Georgia Ellis animated. Find the money for that somewhere. I would just love to see what a young kid would see when he heard that show, having never even seen the TV Gunsmoke.
I know. The young people these days, the young writers, writing shows, they want violence. It isn't the natural thing that it was 50 years ago. It just isn't the same. But maybe you could get somebody who'd be thoughtful enough and adult enough to understand that there were classic days, not just now when everything is violent and shooting and killing and being evil was the right thing to do in a picture.
Well, even the Lone Ranger didn't shoot to kill, you know. He'd shoot the gun out of somebody's hand.
I know.
What does it feel like to know that what you did appealed to every member of the family? Everyone from a child to a 90-year-old grandparent could listen to it. It was clean and it was funny.
Yes, and it had heart. It imitated people in real life. As I always said, animation is the nexus between reality and fantasy. And that's what it is. And things are different. Society is different. I was on the board of governors of the Motion Picture Academy. As you know, I started the Annie Awards. You probably know that. Mm-hmm. When I was president of the SEPA Hollywood, I started. And I helped save the short films branch 4 times because they say shorts aren't being shown anymore in theaters. For 20 years, Bill Littlejohn, who was a wonderful animator, he was on Charlie Brown, he did The Dog, and he did a lot of things. He and I, on the board, recommended that we get an Oscar for an animated feature. There was such an obstacle. Disney will get them all. Disney will get them all. It took over 20 years.
Really?
To get an animated feature Oscar. And Shrek won. The first one. I had never met Jeffrey Katzenberg before. He called me to thank me because he knew that I was instrumental in promoting an Oscar for us, for the animated features. Dennis, hardly any hand-drawn animation anymore. It's all computer. And the wonderful, wonderful animators and actors or artists are out of work because they don't draw anymore. The only time you see most of it is on commercials. Mm-hmm. But the series, features, all CGI. A lot of it is done in India now, and China, and Korea.
Well, you know, a classic example that you only need to look at is the loving care Disney put into Pinocchio.
Yeah.
It has to be one of the most layered, textured, soft, animated cartoons ever made.
Sleeping Beauty. Loved it. Now there's no heart. There is really no heart anymore.
And now, think about this, though. Rocky and Bullwinkle was fairly limited animation, but your voice put the heart in it.
It was so mordantly witty, written, it was sophisticated, and it's just as topical today as it was 50 years ago.
There's nothing dated about those.
No.
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 And that's the thing about, for example, if you listen to Fibber McGee and Molly or Jack Benny or any of those shows, they're still funny, but they'll mention ration coupons and a lot of things people don't know anything about.
Yeah.
One other thing, you talk about the importance of the short. As you know, the only Academy Award that Laurel and Hardy ever won was for a short, The Music Box.
Yeah.
They never won an Academy Award for anything except that short film.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Final question. If you could go back to 1 week or 1 year or one program that you really had the most fun doing, or one boss, what would that be?
Rocky and Bullwinkle.
I'm glad to hear you say that.
Yeah, it was. We had fun. We were all good actors. There was no direction. It was just a wonderful experience being with people you loved, who were talented, and a director who didn't direct. Jay Ward didn't direct. He hired the people he thought could do it.
What is it like today when somebody says, oh, that's June Foray. She was Rocky. Even kids today, the Cartoon Network and everything. What does it feel like when somebody remembers that as if it were yesterday?
The adults who were young, when they saw Rocky and Bullwinkle, they're educating their kids now to Rocky and Bullwinkle. So they say, look, this is good. So 5, 6-year-old kids now love Rocky and Bullwinkle the way they did 50 years ago. They're kids of the kids.
And that show is going to live forever.
Yes.
I must tell people we're sitting in your living room, and you have such incredible memorabilia here of the shows and the cartoon characters. And the one I'm looking at that I think is so funny is Tweety Pie's owner, Granny. Can you do that for a moment? I want you to do Rocky before we leave, but I've always thought that was the cutest grandma character.
Oh, yes. Well, I'm still doing Granny in Looney Tunes, and I wasn't old enough to be Granny when I did Granny, and now that I can be a great Granny, I'm still doing Granny.
That is so funny. When you first sat down and they explained what Rocky and Bullwinkle was going to do, first of all, here they hire as the narrator, doing this accelerated voice, William Conrad, who was, I Am That Man, I'm Matt Dillon. I mean, I can't begin to do William Conrad. To have him be the narrator, and then Paul Frees, who was everything. You can't explain all the things Paul Frees did.
I know.
And then the other people working in that, did they say to you, what would a squirrel sound like? Did Jay Ward have an idea of what he wanted? How was the voice of Rocky born?
I asked him. He said, just an all-American cocky creature. That's all. Smart. Not a smart aleck, but smart. Always helping the stupid Bullwinkle out of problems that Bullwinkle always got himself into. But Hoagie Smoke, it was really great doing Rocky.
June, as far as I'm concerned, you're a national treasure.
Thank you.
You're a sweet lady. You were the queen of cartoons. And the amazing, wonderful thing is you're still working, and in front of me is this 85-pound Annie Award.
Right.
Thanks for taking this hour.
Well, Dennis, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate that so much.
As I mentioned at the beginning, I had wanted to interview June Foray for the longest time, and finally to be able to sit down in her home and accept her hospitality and talk about her incredible career. Well, it was a great afternoon. One of the things she mentioned is that she has crusaded over the years to convince the Academy Awards that they need to continue to honor short films. I talked to Casey Ross recently. She's an independent filmmaker in Hollywood. And I asked her about all of those people out there who are only capable of producing a short film, albeit it's getting easier because of technology.
So many people have cameras at this point, and some of their means are very limited. Shorts provide at least a platform for certain filmmakers. The fact that distributors are even picking up on that, and there's more short film channels, really, they can make a film. They don't need to be in Los Angeles to have that dream, kind of come true. It's better if they learn the ropes, the hard way, the way most of us did in Hollywood, but you can pretty much do it in any state.
That comment June Foray made about saving the short film Oscar, it amazes me that the Academy would have thought about even abandoning it from time to time.
It's very hard to say something pretty powerful and poignant in a short period of time, I think we all learn from having to pitch and do treatments that we have to do that. To pull a crew together and then to just do something like that, I guess you could I could see where they would maybe think at some point, what the hell, we don't really need these anymore. I think the fact that she tried to save that is just it makes my little heart pitter-patter, because it's just another form, that, some people, that's their creative expression, and it just does come out in a short manner, not necessarily in this big, drawn-out, long, feature-length, high-concept now type thing. So I like that she said that, and I like that they still have it.
Independent filmmaker and film teacher Casey Ross, talking about short films and the fact that June Foray, who most of us remember as Rocky the Flying Squirrel, but who had one of the most eclectic careers in movies and cartoons, well, she was a driving force in the Academy Awards to preserve recognition for short films, and that's very, very important. Hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for going back into the archives with me. I'm Dennis Daly. See you next time, right here on YouTube.